When All Elite Wrestling was founded back in January of 2019, we saw main event talent after main event talent being signed for the men's division. And not just singles competitors, great tag teams were also being signed to AEW. So when it was announced that they would also have a women's division, everybody wondered who it was that they would sign, especially because the growing popularity of women's wrestling meant that practically every big name had already been picked up by other wrestling promotions. So this left AEW in a peculiar position. While there was plenty of talent to choose from for the men's division, they found themselves with their hands tied for the women's division. And what I mean by this is that there weren't too many TV-ready women's wrestlers that AEW could sign, so they would have to build this division from the ground up. But in a weird way, this would benefit the talent because it meant that everybody would be starting on an even playing field. And if you could break out, you'd be the one leading this entire women's division. And this left many fans wondering who would be the one to step up. There were many names being thrown around, but it was one young yet experienced wrestler that no one had in mind who emerged as the shining star of this division. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is the unexpected rise of Riho in AEW. We start this story in Shinagawa, Tokyo, Japan, where the wrestler we're talking about today is from. Riho, believe it or not, began her training to become a professional wrestler at just the age of 9. And she was trained by none other than Emi Sakura, another face you might recognize from AEW. Throughout her adolescence, Riho would spend her time mastering her craft and familiarizing herself with the Joshi Puroresu scene. Despite her young age, Riho started climbing the ranks in Japan, and in mid-2010, she began making appearances for DDT Pro Wrestling. It was here where she first met and teamed with one future AEW Executive Vice President, Kenny Omega. Omega saw the potential in Riho. He saw the potential in Joshi wrestling as a whole. As we know now, Omega would leave for New Japan Pro Wrestling and become an absolute superstar. And Riho, she just kept getting better. She started gaining a loyal, albeit a small following. But when Kenny Omega's run with New Japan came to an end in early 2019, he came to America to spearhead AEW, but he also remembered what he had seen in Japan, in particular the Joshi wrestling scene. This gave Kenny Omega an idea. He wanted to showcase Joshi talent in America in a way that hadn't been done before. His plan was just to let these women go out there and wrestle the way they know how to, instead of watering them down, because he was convinced that these women would be able to win over the audience just off their pure talent alone. So we saw this plan come to fruition at AEW's first ever show in May 2019. Double or Nothing, where we saw a 6-woman tag team match where the team of Yuka Sakazaki, Aja Kong, and Emi Sakura took on the team of Ryo Mizunami, Hikaru Shida, and you guessed it, Riho. In a match that many consider one of the best on the show, these 6 women went out there and won the fans completely over. It was different and more fast-paced than anything that anybody was doing on American TV at the time, and it left fans wanting more. Riho in particular would be the one who would stick around the most, as she would make appearances at the next 3 AEW events. The first of which was at Fyter Fest, where she picked up a huge win in a triple threat match against Nyla Rose and Yuka Sakazaki. This win in particular got Riho a huge reaction as she pinned Nyla Rose with a roll-up. It was a win completely out of left field. Nobody expected this, and Riho's reaction after she had won sold it even more. It was such a feel-good underdog babyface moment. You couldn't help but feel happy for Riho. Despite her small size, she was showing big heart, and that's what the audience loved about her. She was so easy to root for, just a pure classic babyface. And thus, this big win gave Riho momentum. However, at the next event, Fight for the Fallen, Riho would take her first loss in AEW when she teamed up with Britt Baker to take on Bea Priestley and Shoko Nakajima. This is the infamous match where Britt Baker was concussed and Riho basically had to do the rest of the match on her own. Despite the losing effort, Riho remained loved by the fans and had them behind her the whole time. If anything, her taking on a team by herself just made the fans root for her even more. It made her character even more sympathetic, so she didn't lose any momentum by taking taking this loss, and Riho's efforts would be rewarded, as it would be announced she would go one-on-one with Hikaru Shida at AEW's next pay-per-view, All Out, and whoever won this match would face Nyla Rose on the premiere episode of AEW Dynamite to crown the first ever AEW Women's World Champion. Both Riho and Shida knew what was on the line, so they went all out. When this match started, the crowd was pretty split on who they were rooting for, but by the end of it, Riho had once again won over the crowd, so you can imagine the ovation she got when she rolled up Shida to get the win. Riho would once again pick up a scrappy underdog win, but everybody loved it because the crowd could buy into Riho's underdog character. The way she would react every time she got a win was just infectious. She made you believe that she was genuinely surprised and that this win meant the world to her. And when people like us see that, it makes us root for her even more because we want her to keep winning and reach the top of the mountain. It's the little mannerisms that Riho does that allowed her to win over an entire audience. Because whenever she came out with that big smile on her face, you knew it was genuine. And that entire aura and energy around her radiates right to the audience. And that's why when the match was set to crown the first ever AEW Women's World Champion, the crowd was firmly behind Riho. But it would be no easy feat, as she would be facing Nyla Rose as stated before. Nyla was easily the favorite to win this match going in, but you couldn't count Riho out. After all, she had come out on top time and time again, even pinning Nyla earlier in the year in that triple threat at Fyter Fest. So all eyes were on the premiere episode of Dynamite to see the first ever AEW Women's World Champion be crowned. Riho would have her star-making moment on the premiere episode of AEW Dynamite. On a show that was already insanely stacked, Riho and Nyla Rose delivered a match that was one of the best in AEW's short history up to that point. The match itself told a great but simple story. It was a classic David versus Goliath scenario. We saw Riho take a beating for the majority of this match, but it was during its third act that this match truly picked up. We saw Riho bring the fight like we hadn't seen before. She hits Nyla with an avalanche Northern Lights suplex, which the crowd goes crazy for, and when that's not enough, a fired up Riho with the whole crowd rallying behind her hits Nyla twice with the jumping knees. She goes for the cover and she gets the win. Riho is crowned the first ever AEW Women's World Champion, and the crowd's reaction to her winning was one of the loudest pops of the year. 14,000 people cheered Riho on as she won the AEW Women's title. When you have a full-sized arena that's packed to the rafters cheering your name, that means you build a bond, a trust with the audience that not many people have. And the reason why this win meant so much to the fans was because it meant so much to Riho. Her emotional post-match celebration with the championship belt will go down as a classic Dynamite moment. The sheer emotion pouring out of Riho after the match once again radiated to the fans. It didn't matter where Riho came from, she was considered a homegrown talent by the AEW fanbase because she represented the principles that AEW was being built on. Fresh and exciting talent. Making Riho the inaugural women's champion for AEW proved to be the right move, as she consistently pulled great ratings for all her segments and matches to the surprise of everyone. Riho wasn't just over, she was a draw, so she was featured mostly every week during the first few months of Dynamite. But sometime during the winter, Riho had to go back to Japan to meet prior wrestling commitments, leaving Dynamite without their women's champion for quite a few weeks. But AEW would make the most out of this situation and turn it into a storyline, and when Riho came back at the start of the new year in 2020, she was a fighting champion right out of the gate, defending her title multiple times over the course of a few weeks. But while Riho was gone, Nyla Rose was the one who was building momentum and eventually once again became the #1 contender. So a huge rematch between the two was scheduled for the February 12th edition of AEW Dynamite. Nyla Rose was coming in with more momentum than ever before, but Riho was the champion. She had already pinned Nyla twice before, so she had to be the favorite going into this. But in a match that was, in my opinion, even better than the first one, and where Riho once again had the whole crowd behind her, Nyla Rose came out victorious, ending Riho's 133-day reign as women's champion in heartbreaking fashion. It was an ending that we should have seen coming, but one that we didn't believe would actually happen. When the match was over, both competitors received a standing ovation for their performances, but the AEW fanbase was left wondering what was next for their favorite babyface of the women's division. It's here where the story takes an abrupt halt or is labeled with the to be continued for lack of a better term, because only a few weeks after Rio's title loss is when the pandemic hit worldwide. And because of this, it meant Riho would fly back to Japan and wouldn't be able to come back to the United States for the foreseeable future due to travel bans and restrictions. There's really no telling where Riho would have gone after losing the title. She was too beloved just to go away. And when she did go away due to the pandemic, it was a huge hit to the AEW women's division because Riho was one of the most popular and reliable performers they had. No matter the town, no matter the opponent, no matter the day, Riho was always going to be cheered by the entire arena. The fact that she got so over without ever speaking a single word of English on TV is mind-blowing, but it's a testament to just how good Riho is. She let her ring work and her mannerisms do the talking, and in turn, she won the hearts of everybody in the AEW fanbase. And to her credit and advantage, she's incredibly young, so she still has her whole career ahead of her. And that's crazy to say because of just how much she's already accomplished with AEW. She wasn't just the first AEW Women's Champion, she was the first babyface champion in AEW. Riho's legacy is that she's the first wrestler in AEW, male or female, to get that big feel-good win for a title. And I don't think anybody could have done a better job in that role than Riho. It's a cliche saying, but the sky really is the limit for Riho. The star potential in her is huge, and I'm counting down the days for this pandemic to be over so we could once again see AEW's #1 wholesome underdog.